Alright, so last week we took a look at the Southern Realms, who were just north of the Black Gulf. Today we're going to head just south of the Black Gulf over to the Badlands and take a look at take a second look at We'z Speshul, the new and improved version since the Warden and the Paunch launched. So kick back, grab a glass of milk, and let's hop right into it.
Wow.
Okay, full disclosure, in my own particular run, I'm actually not going to be in the Badlands, but actually I'm going to be way over in Lustria. But, I mean, come on, that was a way cooler intro, right? So let's just not worry about it. Anyways, We'z Speshul is one of the de facto mods for the greenskins, and if you need a proper breakdown of what it does, I'll link to my previous video when we first looked at it. Things have changed quite a lot since then, however. The mod's undergone a pretty thorough revision in order to take advantage of the new mechanics introduced by the last DLC. Please note, this does, however, mean that the previous main We'z Speshul mod from before, as well as the Arachnarak mounts, River Trolls, and Stone Trolls mods are now completely 100% obsolete, i.e. take them out of your load order or they'll continue to crash your game if you try to use them. Man, these guys really couldn't catch a break, given that one of the only other side mods they had back in the day was the Black Orc Big Boss, which is yet another thing that CA has now introduced as well. On the upshot, there is a new Stone Troll model to work with, Down Mortals got added in as a proper unit as a submod, and the expanded roster compatibility patch, which is another submod, which thankfully means that there's no longer duplicate units if you run both of those mods. This was an issue on the previous one for years. Going forward, I'm going to treat all the We'z Speshul submods and the main mod, however, as just one giant pack, because really, there's not a reason not to run all of them. So we got a lot of changes to get through, but I guess let's start with the only bad news since last time. Many of the named characters currently aren't implemented, so Tinnet Four Eyes, Snegla Grobspit, Borgut Facebeater, Grakagorax, and Duffskull, and they actually still might even be skipped depending on how Lost to Insanity feels about their practicality on a case-by-case basis. Now, for what it's worth, I still expect the more fun ones, chiefly Tinnet Four Eyes, for example, will definitely be re-implemented down the road, so don't let this get you down too badly. I was always a big fan of the Forest Goblin playstyle, so hopefully they'll be tossed back in soon enough. The only other thing that you could possibly construe as a negative is that there's now 2 Black Orc Big Bosses, but frankly, if that bothers you, common sense would dictate just turning that particular submod off in your load order. Personally, didn't bother me all that much, and I actually much preferred the gameplay style of Lost to Insanity's Bob, even if CA's Bob looks a little bit cooler to me. But that's enough bellyaching, let's start looking at all the reasons you should be excited for the revival of this series, starting with something I mentioned earlier. This now has flawless compatibility with the expanded roster series, which is great news for Greenskins players, because they both added tremendously to the vanilla Greenskin options. They both actually punch a little above their weight when combined too, as the expanded roster series really fleshes out the rosters for the little niche sub-factions, namely Forest Goblins and Savage Orcs, while We'z Speshul makes better use of it with its gameplay. I picked the Savage Orc Grak Beast Basher, for example, when I play, and it played like an actual Savage Orc factions. I neglected all the standard orcs, all the black orcs, goblins, forest goblins, and night goblins completely, and instead I focused exclusively on crude beasts and savage orcs, letting me run a dedicated themed army. While you could always run the 2 mods together, even on the old mod, it was a very hands-off approach, and you unfortunately ended up with a ridiculously cluttered building chain, and you had a roster teeming with duplicates. So since the update, it now looks perfect, like DLC quality perfect, and it plays like they were designed to always account for each other. Speaking of themed armies, We'z Speshul might only have a single legendary lord at the moment, but if that one's anything to go by, we are in for a treat. Grak Beast Basher was actually in the original We'z Speshul as well, but I never ended up using him because I was always more partial to Tinnet Four Eyes. Now that I've had a chance to try him out though, man, what a cool campaign experience. Because you're limited to tier 3 on your minor settlements, but all your building chains go to level 4, your minor settlements are effectively just window dressing. They're there to pad up your economy while the major settlement does all of the heavy lifting. On its own, this might not mean anything to you, but you don't start with a major settlement, so you have this really interesting early game conundrum of, do I leave my minor settlement open to attack by the Vampire Coast to try and go and nab a major settlement, or do I just accept the fact that I'm not going to have any good units for a while I try to stamp down Celestial Direfin? Personally, I went with the latter, but there's nothing to say you couldn't do the former and have a very different early game experience to my own. Continuing on with things that make him unique, Beast Basher himself also has a bunch of unique traits to separate him out from the vanilla lords. He has his own Wa ability, a unique Wa unit in the Feral Stegodon, and he even has a unique defeated trait, as well as some unique skills that focus on him buffing the ever-loving hell out of the Savage Orcs. He himself is a dedicated anti-large unit, and man, he is super good at that role. If your enemy is throwing single entity monsters at you, or even better yet, if they're a mounted lord, he will quickly tear them apart. And even if things are starting to go a little bit sideways, his Wa ability makes your boys ridiculously killy and unbreakable for a short time. And if all of that somehow wasn't enough, the Savage Orcs have their own subcultures, so they feel remarkably different from other orc factions, especially when other mods are factored in. This does have the unfortunate effect of having most mods not affect them, but in a weird way that was actually really cool. Because my vanilla orcs are all heavily modified, having a fairly unmodified orc faction ironically made them feel very, very different to everyone else. Alright, but what about balance and compatibility? Well, the former is really, really good. The faction ends up having oodles and oodles of income available, especially once you get Beast Basha up to a high enough level, as your Savage Orcs will eventually end up being free to recruit and extremely low on upkeep. But in spite of having all that income, it's really not easy at all to steamroll your enemies. People seem to forget how much weaker an Orc Doomstack is compared to pretty much every other faction in the entire game. So you need to earn every territory you try to claim, and using the campaign Wa ability is a huge decision to try and make. While you can play the Savage Orcs like a normal Orc army, or mix and match things as you please to power game the crap out of them, keeping a thematic army, so in my case sticking to Beasts and Savage Orcs, was actually a really fun campaign or battle experience too. Because you're not bringing any artillery at all, and because your archers are pretty much terrible, you're effectively reliant on picking favorable engagements, killing them quickly, and then blasting the in-battle Wa ability to steamroll the crap out of your enemy and keep your momentum up. You aren't weak necessarily, but you do need to play around what you have and have a plan. Now as for compatibility, it's pretty good. I did have a couple issues, but I didn't have any egregiously bad conflicts, so nothing where I had to out and out remove stuff from my mod list. As was already mentioned, the Savage Orcs do have their own unique subculture, so a lot of the stuff that affects standard orcs doesn't affect them in the slightest. The only time this ever actually really acted up for me was in the Recruit Defeated Legendary Lords mod, where defeated factions would go off the damn rails if I accepted them as refugees. One orc transformed into a goblin, which was odd, but not nearly as odd as the orc who turned himself into a high elf. Pro tip, if you turn on lore accurate in the recruit mod, it will prevent having access to these lords, and it thus solves the issue entirely. The 33 skills mod also occasionally gave me somewhat weird hiccups, such as tossing all of the lord level skills onto the black orc hero that this adds in, but those were the only two, and neither of them were particularly severe. On a plus side, as I mentioned, there is express compatibility patches for several mods, so in addition to the previously mentioned expanded rosters, orcs, and greenskins, there's also an SFO patch, a closer to tabletop patch, and an end times compatibility patch. Conclusion time then. Should the new We'z Speshul be a permanent fixture in your mod list? Absolutely. It's a great way to add a little diversity to a faction that you'll run into quite a lot in your own playthroughs, even as an enemy, and it helps give every greenskin who isn't Grom some more unique mechanics to play with when you're playing as them. On top of that, it doesn't make any of the greenskin factions too strong or too weak, so it's not going to bugger up your campaign experience at all, and it's also completely safe to leave it in your load order, as like I said, if you tweak the settings of the other mods at campaign start, you'll have absolutely no issues whether you're playing with them or playing against them. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for this particular video. Is there any other factions or mods you want to see reviewed? Let me know down in the comments below and I'll try my best to hop to it. As always, thanks for watching and I'll see you all next time.